The next optional parameter that we're going to study is this parameter called session ID. Now, I'm going to first of all point out that the session ID as a concept is quite a deep concept. I even have a course about that. I have an entire course about the concept of the session in Dialogflow. It's called Dialogflow Sessions. You can check it out. You can search for it on my course website. But the important thing is that I'm not going to actually explain how Dialogflow sessions work. So I'm going to ask you to go and do your own homework on that. But once you understand how Dialogflow sessions work, you should be able to follow what I'm going to explain in this particular video, because it's still, there are some peculiarities of the website chatbot. In spite of understanding everything about Dialogflow sessions, you might still have to watch this video to see how Dialogflow implements the session ID for the web chat. So what I'm going to do is you can see that first of all, I have added, this is page 1, into the body tag of the index.html page. I have also created a page 2.html, and notice that the body has the text, this is page 2, and I have otherwise everything in this page is identical to page 1. There is basically almost nothing different except for the fact that I have the text inside the body of that page is slightly different. Also notice that now I am using this session ID ABCDEF. I think it just has to be a string. I'm not sure if there are any specific constraints, but it probably doesn't allow special characters and things like that. So I would just stick with the regular old string for that, for generating session IDs. So here, what's happening is that as the page loads, the DF messenger tag is going to send the session ID, or I'm not going to sending is not the right word. It's better to say that the the chat widget is initialized with this session ID. That would be a better way to think about it. So this session ID is, this value is initialized when the chat widget loads, and on page 2 we are going to use the same session ID. Now that's sort of like the concept of how Dialogflow, how sessions work on websites. When a visitor comes to a specific page, and then they click on some link and then go to the next page on the site, effectively they are treated as though they are in the same session in terms of like the web programming, right? So what's going to happen now is, so let's open the page and notice that it says this is page 1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to type a message to explain or indicate what we are doing. Of course, there is no text. This is not being handled in the agent in any way. So this is going to trigger the fallback intent, and I'm still going to proceed, regardless of that fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type something with session ID from page 1. So that's the message that I'm typing. And you'll see, of course, it's triggering the fallback intent. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the page 2. Now if I were to just go to page 2 and load it like that, it's as if I clicked a link on that page. So let's press enter. Now you can see that this is page 2, and I'm going to say with session ID from page 2. All right. So again, it's going to trigger the fallback intent. Nothing special there. It's not, till now what we've seen is not anything that would be surprising. But because I use the same session ID on both these pages, if you were to go to Dialogflow's console, and you can actually see the history, right? Now if you were to look at the history, it's actually grouped based on the session ID. Okay, so now what's happened here is that it's actually, you can see that it has these two messages with session ID from page 1, with session ID from page 2. Both of them triggered the fallback intent, of course, but you can also see that they got grouped together because they both belong to the same session. Like, because we use the same session ID as we interacted with the chat widget on the site, because of that it all got grouped into the same conversation. Now in fact I can go back and go to the index page once again. Go here, say with session ID from index page again, and you can see it's coming with hi, how are you doing? It somehow it actually seemed to have thought that it's the welcome intent. Something in this phrase must have triggered that. But in any case, let's go back to Dialogflow, go to the history again. So here you can see that it has got the with session ID from index page again as part of the same conversation. That is, it's because it's still using the same session ID, it's going to appear to Dialogflow as though it all happened within the same conversation. Now, one thing that you might notice is that unlike the chat widgets that you get from a company like Drift or Intercom or something, where you will actually see that the history of your conversation, if you don't clear your browser cache, usually what you see is that it's maintained over multiple sessions, and like you can see the past history that you had in the chat widget. Now, the Dialogflow Messenger integration is not the right tool for doing something like that. And in fact, if you try to use the Dialogflow Messenger integration for showing a history of the conversation the user had on other pages on the same site, I am guessing that it's going to be a lot of work. In fact, you might be much better off just going for some other third-party third-party website integration like bot copy or something like that. Because in this case, what is happening is that even though the session is marked properly, and even though in your Dialogflow history you can actually see that all these messages are falling into the same session, you have to do the work to go and fetch all the past messages from some kind of database, which means first of all you need to have them stored somewhere. So you're really looking at a lot of work if you want to do something like that. And yeah, like I said, that's probably not the best use case for the Dialogflow Messenger built-in integration, at least as it stands now. Maybe they will improve this feature, I'm not sure, but as it stands now, that's not the best use case. So what we've seen now is that with the session ID included, you can see that it's actually able to group all these messages as though they belong to the same conversation.